If you're trying to sell yourself, write down what you like to do, what you can do ahead of time. Potentially being put in jail, then that just adds to the urgency of needing this type of care. Why can't nurses be the medical directors?
You had a recent change in your career. Let's start talking about that. How is your current role as a strategy consultant in Oseo?
Oseo is a early startup. It's not nursing at all, to be honest, but I've used what I know from my previous role to help with this early business. It's a subscription box for people of the Korean diaspora to connect with different groups of Korean people. There's 3 themes that we're currently working on right now. First one is life in the 70s. So there's a lot of like snacks from when our parents were younger. Then we have single mothers in Korea. We're gathering stories and researching their experiences and items that they use in stories. And the third is college in Korea or university in Korea. I'm helping with some of the strategy and planning to launch sometime next year. So it's nothing to do with nursing at all. Luckily, with my last job, at a startup, I was able to transfer a lot of the skills to help with this.
Which skills are you talking about that you could transfer?
Definitely organizing, launching a product. So at my last job was the associate medical director at Hey Jane. We grew a lot over like a period of 2 years. So we were offering one service, which was abortion care. And then by the time I left, we were offering birth control, infection. This is like a kind of a long process. Every service has a new launch date with like different milestones that you have to hit, different things that you have to keep track of, metrics, objectives, initiatives, and all that stuff that I learned in my last jobs. Those are the skills that I'm bringing to this job, is just identifying the milestones that we have to hit, when we want to hit them, and how we're measuring our success.
Let's talk more about your role at Hey Jane.
Okay.
So Hey Jane is an online abortion and sexual telehealth clinic.
Yeah.
What was your role as an associate medical director there?
It was kind of a mix between managing the clinical team, working on protocols and developing SOPs, kind of the traditional what you think of when you think of somebody who's in a leadership role in healthcare, mixed with some really interesting work around where the company was going in terms of growth, working with different departments like product and engineering to make sure that what we were providing was the best possible version of what we could create. Some other fun stuff, like we did a really fun interview with Cosmo. My CEO and I got to go and interview at their headquarters in Columbus Circle. And that was really, really fun. But we both showed up wearing like this same color, bright pink shirt. And we walked in, we looked at each other, we were like, we're gonna
without coordinating?
We did not coordinate at all. This is not okay. Like, this looks weird, but it was fine. An example of something that I would do. So every quarter or every 3 months of the year, the leadership group would meet and talk about what we wanted to accomplish for that quarter. So it could be launching X number of insurance plans and making sure that we have contracts in place so that we can have more patients go through their insurance companies. It could be, oh, this legislation happened. We have to pivot and change what states we're going to focus on expanding to. It happened right after SB 8, which was when the whole thing with Texas happened a couple of years ago. We were originally going to launch in some states that were very abortion friendly because we were so new to the process. But because of what was happening in Texas, we switched our direction and tried to make sure that we had the surrounding states covered so that people could pick up medications without having to travel too far.
Since you touched on what happened in Texas, I'd love to hear your experience because you're working at Hey Jane in 2022. So what happened was that the Supreme Court overruled the decision from 1973 that the Constitution does not support the right to abortion. Has that event affected the work at Hey Jane, like clientele-wise and where they're from, etc.?
Yes. One of the first things that we noticed was a subjective increase in the feeling of desperation that people were having to get care. If you're pregnant and you don't want to be pregnant, it's never a super calm Zen time for anybody. It's like a very stressful experience to have. Then when you're faced with all of these blocks, including potentially being put in jail, then that just adds to like the urgency of needing this type of care. We got a lot of people who couldn't leave the state. You know, it's expensive, right? Like to leave whatever state you're in, especially if it's as big as Texas, find somewhere to go and stay. And there were people who couldn't leave and would just reach out to us like desperate for care. We were limited by what we could do, but that was definitely something that we saw increase a lot after Roe fell. Basically, how our care model worked was you have to attest that you're physically in the state when you purchase the medication, or one of our providers reviews your intake form. What that meant was that there were a lot of people traveling from out of state, from, let's say, Mississippi to Illinois, which always happened anyway, because every state still had their limitations around when and what type of care you could receive. The number of people that we saw traveling increased a lot.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
This can be a sensitive topic depending on where you are, what the political landscape you're in, and what kind of decisions you have to make. So it's interesting to hear from your perspective when you were working at the abortion clinic.
Yeah, we're all nurses, and statistically in the United States, 1 in 4 people who have the ability to become pregnant will have an abortion at some point in their lifetime. So the chances that any of the nurses watching this video have taken care of somebody who has had an abortion or who are going to have an abortion is astronomically high. You absolutely have taken care of people who have had an abortion or who are going to. We just have to consider that these moments don't happen in a vacuum. They happen within the broader lens of a person's life. It's just something important. I think something to just keep in mind when people are trying to do their best to provide whatever type of care they provide, whether you're in med surg or ICU or whatever you're doing. This person has a past. They're going to have experiences coming in. It's not going to change the way you care for them.
We should be in consideration of their past as a healthcare provider, healthcare worker.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought it was interesting when I was looking at your past nursing career that you moved from working in the fertility world, where you're helping women and couple get pregnant, to Planned Parenthood and Hey Jane, where you advocate for people who want to prevent pregnancy and have abortion. So I want to hear your thought process and what the transition was like.
Totally. Okay. Definitely a transition in terms of the way you talk to patients, right? Because when you're in fertility and the pregnancy test comes up positive, you're like, yay! And then when you're in abortion care and the pregnancy test comes up positive, you're like, oh. But if you really think about it, they're all on the same spectrum of reproductive and sexual care. I had definitely crossover patients, like patients who were in fertility now because either they were a little older now, or maybe they have a different partner and their partner's sperm's not that great, or whatever reason, but have had abortions in the past. I actually had a couple of patients who came for abortions at Planned Parenthood who had been through fertility, but they were too ashamed to tell their physicians. That happened like definitely a handful of times. So there's a lot of crossover in the patient population. In terms of what prompted me to switch, I got into fertility early in my nursing career. I am forever grateful for the knowledge that I gained about reproductive endocrinology. Like, I've just never really encountered a setting where I've had to learn so much so quickly about the patho of reproductive endocrinology. And that really just helped. To this day, it is helpful. But at the time, there were very, very few insurance plans that covered fertility treatment. So the patients that we were seeing were the 1%ers, people who had a lot of the financial ability to spend lots and lots of money on fertility treatment. And there was a disparity that I noticed with those patients and the patients who were servers in Chinatown who worked 24-hour shifts to try one round of treatment. And so after a while, it was a little heartbreaking. So I thought maybe I'll try to dip my toes in the nonprofit world. Maybe that would be interesting. That was exactly when I decided I would work at Planned Parenthood.
I worked as a fertility nurse as well.
You did? Oh my gosh, isn't it hard?
But I was in more of clinical side. So I was in the OR and PACU.
Okay.
And as a coordinator, like talking to the patient about their plans before and after. When I started in the fertility world, I came from emergency room where people came for multiple abortions. I had to adjust to that environment. As you said, how to talk to patients, how my mindset worked. And I totally agree what you just said. I think there is also a crossword, as you said, that there are skills that you can bring to each realm. And it's not totally different. You still have to understand where they're coming from, where they're at, and how to provide care.
In terms of the amount of stress that people are experiencing for care, I would say people who are going through fertility are much more stressed out than people who are going through an abortion.
Oh, wow, really?
I think so. In a different way. Well, see, with abortion care, it's one day. You're with the patient one day. But then when you're a coordinator, you're with them for at least 2.5 weeks. More, because with like all the lab work and everything that everybody has to do beforehand, you have to give people bad news like so much, so often. And that's, I hated those calls. So in terms of stress, I would say like everybody was stressed out when I was working fertility. Whereas people were stressed, but it was a different kind of stress in the abortion clinic.
When you were applying for the jobs, when comparing physical clinic and outpatient to online clinic, how did you do applying for jobs, looking for jobs, and talking to the employer differently?
Networking will open so many doors for you. When I transitioned into remote work, I learned about the role through a colleague of mine who was also doing some work for the company. I would definitely encourage people to try and make small talk and chat with whoever you're working around, because you never really know what they're doing on the side or what other side hustles they might have. You have a good rapport with them, you're going to pop up when the need arises. So that's kind of how I heard about this role. When I was applying, of course, I did a lot of reading on the company. I asked a couple of people who knew about the company what they could tell me about it. The abortion reproductive health space is pretty small, so everyone kind of knows somebody by a few degrees of separation. A lot of these remote companies do prefer people who have remote experience or staff experience, but that's a little bit unreasonable to expect from nurses. And they know that, like the tech startups and healthcare startups, but they definitely want people to be comfortable with tech, not like extreme tech, but just be able to schedule meetings on Google Calendar and be comfortable using a computer. That's, I would say, one of the biggest learning curves for when you're transitioning from outpatient to remote. It's just getting used to all the technology that everybody is using. I never heard of Slack.
Oh, nurses don't know what Slack is.
I never heard of Slack. And now it's like, oh, you don't have Slack? Are you even a real company? Anybody who doesn't know what Slack is, it's like AIM. It's just a messaging platform that people use to communicate with each other in a company. Oh, I wonder if your audience will know what AIM is.
I didn't know what AIM was because I didn't grow up.
Oh God. Okay. In startup world and remote world, you have to be a good communicator because you're not in person. Being able to work independently because no one's walking around watching you. And then being interested in other areas. If you're a nurse, you like doing TikToks or you like posting on social media and you're good at it, or whatever other skills or other things that you can do are always helpful to a startup because they pull people in. Like I was doing TikToks at my last job.
Yeah. I want to watch them.
I didn't know what I was doing. The first TikTok I did, I was like, okay, this is the background that I want to use. My makeup is like fine. And I was just like, okay, here's my script, blah, blah, blah. Then the last TikTok I did was just like, hi guys, it was a learning curve also for that, for sure. People in tech are really interested in what people have to offer and also just additional skills. If you're trying to sell yourself, write down what you like to do, what you can do ahead of time to just have that on hand when like talking to someone. Because I've noticed that both ways, the interviews I've conducted and the interviews I've been in, when people can include something that shows you're like a person or like your interest, or it doesn't even have to be unique, honestly, it just needs to be genuine, then that goes a long way. That's just general interview advice though.
Oh yeah, being genuine, like anyone can feel it, like whether you're being fake or not.
Yeah, everybody can look up interview answers and say the right thing, but just show a little bit of your wackiness. Don't go overboard. Don't go crazy. Like I like to build little miniatures, whatever. Something I picked up during COVID. And somebody asked me one time how I like to prevent burnout. And I was like, oh, look at my tiny mansion that I built. So anything to make a connection.
That's important. Like we sometimes forget about them. And like when we were preparing for a new job or an interview, we just want to look professional and very formal, but you also have to be human. And
yes, especially in a remote setting, of course you want somebody who is clinically safe and sound and compassionate and is a good nurse. But you also want somebody who you're going to be able to connect with remotely. You don't have to be best friends, but the vibe has to be right as well.
Yeah, you have to be able to work together.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because you're not in person.
At Hey Jane, you were the lead RN and then you moved to the associate medical director. How did that work?
When I joined, I was the lead RN because I was the only RN. Then our team grew and we hired more nurses. So I stayed on as the lead RN, and that job, it was managing the patient care, but it was also filling in the gaps of what was missing because the clinic was open, but it was so early that I joined in the fall and the first patient was in January. So it was like a very, very early days clinic. So there was a lot of structure to be built and just sort of ironing out to be done. So I helped with that, helped build the team. At one point, our medical director, my boss, actually had to leave because she was located in Texas. Right now, it's not safe for some people to provide this type of care, depending on what state you're in. And Texas is one of the big ones where there was a risk to be criminalized. Our company developed a policy to protect the people who were directly interfacing with the patients. Long story short, my medical director lived in Texas, and so she ended up leaving the company. So then myself and one nurse practitioner and one midwife were the more senior people on the team. And we were like, while we're looking for the medical director, we have to get this stuff done. Then our CEO honestly was just, do we need a medical director? Do we need to hire a doctor to do this? Like, you guys are already doing this. And we were like, yeah, I guess you're right. Don't need a doctor to do this. Like, we had a physician who was the PC owner, who owned the medical part of the company, and we had advisors and stuff like that. But we kind of took a minute to be, why can't nurses be the medical directors? I mean, there was no reason. There was no legal reason. Combined, we had 40 plus years of experience. And so we created a nurse-led organization, really. There was a nurse practitioner who was the medical director, then me, an RN, who was the associate medical director, and then a nurse midwife who was the director of quality assurance. And the three of us, created this triangle structure, which was awesome. I mean, it was so cool to be like, well, I'm the associate medical director. No, I'm not a doctor. I'm
No, it's a really mind shift change that I always thought the medical director has to be a doctor too. It's fascinating that you guys meet that triangle relationship and structure.
That came with working in tech startup. Our CEO did not come from the healthcare world. She came from Uber, and wait, why does it have to be a doctor? And the three of us were like, because?
Let's come up with a reason.
Like, I don't know. Now that I'm thinking about it, I've never thought about that before. That's something that I really enjoyed about working in startup, was like getting fresh eyes on healthcare from people who do not have a healthcare background. That was really, really cool, because then you start to question why things are done the way they're done. And then you can start to think of ways to make things better.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that we do as nurses traditionally and like how we think healthcare, but from outside of healthcare, it's totally different. Yeah. Were you interested in women's health from nursing school?
Kind of. My mother baby rotation was definitely my favorite part of nursing school. It was just so fun and so interesting. I wouldn't say that nursing school was really what triggered the interest in me. I think that just going through life, having these experiences really created a soft spot for me.
I would say nursing school reiterated that I'm interested in this type of work and this field. And clinical information and knowledge to me was the most interesting when we were doing our L&D and our mother baby stuff.
But I see that you started soon after graduating nursing school in fertility. So I was wondering where that interest came from.
Well, to be honest, it was really, really difficult getting a job in New York at the time with an associate's degree right out of nursing school. So I was like, oh, let me just try this out. We'll see how it goes. Like I said, I really, really learned so much about reproductive endocrinology. I mean, it's crazy. The stuff that you have to know about what the hormones do, because the patients ask you these really, really specific questions and you just end up learning so much because you have to. It wasn't really planned at all. I had actually planned on being a flight nurse. I was like,
Really?
I'm going to be high adrenaline, not strong, but I'll figure it out. That's where I was trying to go, but everything's landed where it needed to land. Who knows what I would have been doing if I had become a flight nurse. I almost joined the military because I wanted to be a flight nurse.
Oh, wow.
I don't even know. I don't think I would have made it.
Do you regret it?
I don't regret it, but I wonder, because I never worked in the hospital. So I never worked med surg, critical care. So I always wonder what it would have been like and where I would have been in my career now. I don't think regret is the right word. I'm curious. Yeah. But it's too late now. I'm not
It's never too late.
I don't want to start over.
Nursing, you can do so much with that. That's what's great about it too.
I've definitely thought about different areas of nursing that I would be interested in doing. There's this really cool program that is definitely on my bucket list to work for them at some point called Nurse Family Partnership. They're a national program that started probably about 60 years ago. And it was started to improve outcomes for the infants of first-time parents who are within a certain income bracket. Very evidence-based. Nurses are assigned a family and they stay with that family until the baby or the kid is around 2 years old. And they start with the pregnant person from when they're 10 weeks pregnant. So it's this relationship building thing. It has been shown to decrease the rate of child abuse, increases parents going back for college or GED or whatever they might want to do, decreases rates of incarceration. I mean, the research is incredible. And every nurse that I've talked to who's worked for them has loved working there. They have a very low turnover.
So is it like a regular checkup with nurses?
Yeah, so it's the nurses go to their house. I forget how often it is. So they do checkups. How is the baby growing physically? But it's very holistic. I mean, everybody should have a nurse help them do this. But they tell you, okay, here are the milestones, not only the milestones that your baby should be reaching, but here are the things that you can do to improve your connection with the baby. At this point, they're responding to XYZ, and they really work with the family to be, what are your goals for your life? It's just a really holistic approach to care. Every state has Nurse Family Partnership.
Thank you for letting us know. I didn't know about this. And it's helping parents and their family adapt to the new life and educating them.
Yeah. And using research and evidence that have proven outcomes for not just the baby, but the parents. That always just makes you feel better about what you're doing because you know that it's evidence-based.
Let's switch gear a little bit. One of the things that I'd like to talk about in my channel is about money. When I was growing up, I didn't learn anything about personal finance and money. I wish that more nurses and other people know this at an earlier stage. Are you interested in personal finance and what do you do for that?
I mean, like you, I also didn't grow up with any sense of money. I remember one time I asked my mom how much money she made. I think I was about to graduate high school. And she was like, why do you need to know that? And I was like, I need to know how much money I should make. Is $20,000 enough money? I have no idea. Still, for a lot of people, learning as you go. I noticed that my white friends, my husband's white too, seem to come in with more knowledge about what to do with your finances and I had to learn on my own. first things I learned was to start a Roth IRA like as soon as possible and just try your best to hit that max amount every year. But even if you can't, that's fine. Whatever little bit you can put into that helps. Try to find a company that will match your 401k. Although it's not like a huge deal, but it does make a difference. I'm not going to go into my personal finances because I'm so bad with money. I'm like, let's eat. I'm like, let's order food again.
Which is a struggle.
But one thing I did learn is a little bit about equity. If you work for a startup, depending on how early you get in or what your role is, let's say you get in really early, like when there are like 10 people or so, you can talk about equity or shares of the company because it's very likely that that company has not gone public yet. That's really good to know that you can request or talk about or and ask for. Let's say you're at a company, a health company, tech company, and they're a little bit bigger, but you're one of the first nurses to come on. That's another opportunity to ask for equity or shares in the company. If you do get equity, and when you do get equity, make sure you do early exercise. If you believe in the company and you feel that they're going to grow and they're going to do well, then I would early exercise your shares, which is basically means that when you get shares of a company and you get equity of a company, you don't get them all at once. It's kind of like PTO. You'll want like the more days that you work, the more you accrue. So like you have a set amount of equity that you're allowed, but you don't get access to purchasing them until monthly or every couple months. It slowly accrues over time. When you early exercise, you're able to pay for all the shares at once at the rate that they're like currently worth. So the benefit of is that you're paying for all your shares at probably what's going to be a lower price point than let's say like 2 years down the road if you pay slowly over time. That's my best advice.
No, this is something that we don't commonly share, especially if you work in a hospital. We don't get equity of the hospital. Right?
No, my gosh, can you imagine?
Yeah, I
That's
think
too
we should.
generous.
That would be great,
Yeah,
actually.
no, the
Yeah.
nurses deserve equity in the hospital.
Yeah, I think growing up in a Korean household too, talking about money and how much you want to make and all those were tabooed.
Oh my God, I know.
Yeah. After I moved here, I think I developed that sense that it's okay to talk about money and like talk to your friends, family about it and what your goal is and how you manage and invest, which I think can and should be shared commonly.
It should. If you come here from another country or if you're first generation, you're starting off a step behind than the people whose families have been here for multiple generations because their parents and their grandparents, they all know invest in the stock market. They've been investing. They at least know what a 401k is probably. But my dad's kage didn't have a 401k. I could never imagine asking my dad how much money he was like bringing home.
You'll be scolded.
I know, 100%. He'd be like, what? I'm not buying you enough stuff?
Hanna, is there anything that I didn't ask you today that you'd like to talk about?
I know we had talked kind of earlier about what I'm doing now. I kind of don't know what I'm doing right now. So I resigned like a month and a half ago, and I'm like exploring what opportunities there are with my nursing background, and then all the stuff that I learned working in startup and business. It's been really interesting because I've been talking to a lot of people who actually aren't nurses who are introducing me to a lot of new ideas and new technology that exists, like AI, satellites, mapping, with just crazy stuff. If people are interested in figuring out what they can do with their nursing degree, I would really try to network as much as possible. Even if you find like a company you like on LinkedIn or anything like that, just like cold message them. If you need help like writing a message, just ask ChatGPT to write one for you. Some people won't respond, but other people will. You just get on a call with them and just talk to them and you can get ideas. There may be ways for you to merge nursing with like other interests that you have. All these tech people are creating job titles. They're kind of figuring it out as they go. Nurses, we should be able to do that. Like nursing, you can't say you're a nurse if you're not a nurse. If you have experience coordinating, or maybe you were part of a clinic that started a new service or something like that, you can put something like project management on your resume if you're interested in like expanding and seeing what you can do. I put in like the things that I really liked doing into ChatGPT, and it like popped up a title for me, and I put that on my resume, and I was great, we'll see where this goes. So I would definitely encourage people to make use of the technology that's out there, to be open. Yeah, like look into the tech world, because there are a lot of tech companies that are looking for healthcare professionals to either be consultants or to help with projects. there's no need to limit the traditional career of nursing tradition. Yeah.
And nursing is so versatile, like the skills that
Yeah.
we learn.
Very. There are a lot of tech companies that are trying to break into health tech, people who don't know about healthcare. And the insight that you have from working as a nurse in bedside in a clinic, you're coming with a wealth of experience and knowledge that you didn't even know you had. People will be asked, what are patient ratios? And you're like, I'm actually an expert in that. Let me tell you, you just don't know what you're an expert is until you talk to somebody who needs that information. So
Right.
there's a lot of opportunity for nurses in tech.
Thank you for encouraging them and us.
Yeah. More nurses should be able to work from home and check out the tech world and stuff.
More opportunities. Hanna, if the audience wants to connect with you online, how can they do that?
I always check my messages on LinkedIn. People can message me on LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you.